All right then. Well, thank you again, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking this time for your spiritual growth, for your dedication to your evolution of your soul, your dedication to learning a little bit more every day and practicing a little bit more every week your spiritual nature. The title of this morning's talk is In Perfect Ease, in Perfect Ease. And what we want to really grasp, what we want to get, just not just a yeah intellectual, I understand kind of thing. But oh wow, oh yeah, oh my God kind of thing, a realization. We want to take it from just hearing it. We want to take it to embodying it, and then we want to take it to living it. And what we want to come to our recognition as we have considered this whole month, we have considered how perfect nature is in her cloaking every square inch of dirt that we can find, even the cement, if we don't keep after it, will be filled with life. That nature abhors a vacuum and knows exactly what to do in order to blossom, in order to grow, in order to express itself more fully and more completely in whatever form it has taken. It knows what to do, and it does it with perfect ease. Perfect ease. There is nothing for God to struggle with, for God is all that there is. There is nothing that could possibly stand in the way of God, for God is omnipotence. And what we want to do is we want to fully comprehend the idea that that includes us. We're not excluded from that. We're not apart from it. We're not outside of it. We are not observers of it. But we are the very ease of God's life as us, living here, living now. Oh wow. Oh wow. So we come to this in terms of understanding that the magnificence and the ease and the peace, the omniscience, the omnipotence, the omnipresence, it already is. It already is. We don't have to make God or trick God or beseech God to do anything that it has not already done. See, it's already given. It's already here. But what we have to do is we have to accept it. We have to surrender to it. We have to give up the struggle. We have to give up the struggle. The trees don't struggle. They grow. They live. They put down their roots. If there's something in the way of where the root wants to go, the root goes around it. Eventually the roots might go through it, breaking it up. But you don't hear the tree complaining. You don't see the trees going to coffee break in the morning with the other trees and complaining. Wow, you know how hard it was to put my roots down? You know, I had to stand up to the wind. You know, I had to figure out how to open up my leaves to gather the sunlight. It's silly, isn't it? In the cartoons, they might do that. But in life, they do not. Because they cannot resist the activity of God. They cannot struggle. So what we've been talking about this month is we have been talking about awakening more fully to the idea of, to the embodiment of, and to the experience of our own spiritual nature. What we have been considering is fully realizing that we are spiritual beings and living our lives as if we knew that was true. Living our lives in a manner that is consistent with the idea that the perfect ease, the perfect wisdom, the perfect power of God is with us every minute of every day. The divine love goes before us, making the crooked ways straight. Divine love remains after we have passed this way, blessing each and every one who comes across our path. What it truly means is that we have died to the idea of being human, and we have risen into the experience of our spiritual nature, the death, the resurrection, the being born again, the rebirth, the themes for this time of the month. So we want to recognize that the human part and the egotistical part, that is the egotistical part being the ideas that I hold to be true about myself. That's what I consider the ego to be, a collection of ideas that I hold to be true about myself and about the world in which I live, the way it is. This is the way that I think it is. It's my worldview. And I have a worldview of what it means for me to exist in this world, what I have to do in order to make a living, what I have to do in order to get the things I want, what I have to do in order to succeed. And there's no shortage of books and tapes and seminars that we can go to that tell us how to be more assertive, how to negotiate to win, how to set our goals, how to move forward in a manner consistent with the way that the human concept of the way life works is. And that concept, what we have to recognize about that concept is that very often that concept believes in the necessity of struggle. No pain, no gain. Anything that's worth having is worth struggling for. The early bird catches the worm. You know, you've heard the story of Teddy Roosevelt got to be #1 in his class because he knew who his competition was, and he could see that other student's light from his own window, and he vowed to himself that he would continue to study at least a half an hour after he saw the other boy's light go out. We have grown up with this mythology of if you work hard, and the harder you work, the more successful you will be. And I think we're starting to see that unravel in our society a little bit now. We're finally starting to realize that the people who are making the most, who are financially the most successful, don't necessarily work the hardest. And we're also seeing that people who work very, very, very hard quite often don't succeed, can't break out of the conditions that they find themselves in. So this human myth of struggle is good, struggle is what we need, struggle brings out the best, you know. I used to hear people say that in business all the time. They would set up competition within their own organizations between two departments in their own organizations because they believed that competition was going to bring out the best. And it never brings out the best. It brings out better. You know, maybe it's better than nothing. Maybe people will work a little bit harder when they're in competition. But what you get is not the best. You get the best through collaboration, cooperation. You get the best through bringing in many different viewpoints and being able to work together to find the synergy and the harmony, and competition doesn't do that. So this is what the symbol of the hard shell on the outside of the seed is. It is the crust of our ego, it is the crust of our culture, it is the crust of our belief that we have to do it, we have to make it happen, we have to struggle. How am I going to get that done? How am I going to motivate, manipulate others to get them to do what I want them to do so that I can have what is necessary? And that is a very normal experience in our life. But what we have to recognize is that within that seed, within that shell, or if you want to use the example of the chicken growing inside the egg, within that hard shell that we have put on for protection is the seed of perfection. Now in our spiritual year, you know, when we talk about Christmas, we talk about the idea of the Christ being born into consciousness as a babe. Something that needs to be nurtured, something that needs to be cared for. It comes into our experience, it's born in the stable of our consciousness. In other words, it comes to us in whatever state our mind happens to be in, our thoughts happen to be in, our consciousness happens to be in, and it doesn't judge. You know, when babies come into your family, they don't come in and say, oh my goodness, what in the world did I do? Why did I choose this family? You know, they come in and they are accepting. Whatever the lifestyle of the family is, the baby adopts as being a normal, natural lifestyle. The Christ that we're talking about is the presence of the divine. It is that point that we call the soul. It is that point where the divine has individualized itself as us. We become aware of that. We get a glimpse of that. But we must nurture it. We talked about weeding and feeding the garden. We talked about preparing the soil. We talk about nurturing and creating a fertile environment where this seed can grow. In the New Testament, we are told that the child Jesus, the human Jesus, grew in wisdom and understanding. We have very little about him in the New Testament scriptures from the time he was born until the wedding feast at Cana, which is recognized by the theologians as the beginning of his ministry in the world. We really only have an incident where he was about 12 years old and his family had gone to Jerusalem for the Passover and he got separated. And his parents found him in the temple, and he was discussing the scriptures with the wise men. He was demonstrating his knowledge. And we're told that he went back with his parents and he grew in wisdom and understanding. He studied. He read. He applied what he learned to his spiritual growth, until he reached the point where the idea of the human was gone, and the idea of the presence and the activity of God as him was so complete that he became the Christ. He became the Christ. We have the symbol of the death on the cross, which is the complete letting go of the human experience. And we have the resurrection on Easter morning, which is the being reborn more fully as a spiritual being. If we go over into the the Buddhist tradition, we have the Buddha who was born again in miraculous circumstances in the mythology. He was born standing up, he could walk, and when he walked, lotus flowers blossomed in his little footsteps. And his father was told by the wise men, you remember Jesus' parents were told by the wise men that he was destined to be the Savior of the world, Emmanuel, God is with us. And the Buddha's father was told that this one is going to be a great warrior or a great saint. And the father wanted him to be a warrior, a king, and tried to protect him from the things that the father knew would draw him into the religious life, compassion. The father tried to keep him from seeing pain and suffering in the world. But there was something within the Buddha, as there's something within the seed which knows when it's time to sprout, as there's something within the chick when it knows it's time to sprout. There was something within him that left the protection of the palace and went out and observed pain and suffering, and then committed his life to understanding why and alleviating that pain and that suffering. And there came a point after the Buddha tried many different techniques, asceticism, meditation, many different techniques. There came a point where he sat under the tree and he said, I will stay here until I die or until I reach enlightenment. He made a commitment to his spiritual growth. He was willing to cast off everything of human experience. He had already cast off the riches of the palace. He had already cast off the ties to his family. He was living in the forest with the forest dwellers. And now he was willing to even cast off the mortal body to allow enlightenment, the realization of the presence and the activity of the divine, the Christ consciousness, to come through him. So we have these two great examples. We have these examples as we go through life of what happens when we get to that point in our spiritual evolution that is symbolized by spring, the renewal, the casting off of the old, the letting go of the old, the releasing and the letting go of the ideas that we need to struggle, and the acceptance of the idea that it is not us, but it is the very presence of God within us that does the work, that knows what to do, that knows how to do it, that knows when to do it. And we have to let go of the ego satisfaction of I being the one who made that happen. I worked hard. I did this. I did that. And we have to really get comfortable with the idea that I of my own self know nothing. I of my own self can do nothing. But there's that. There is that omniscience. There is that omnipotence. There is that which has created the entire universe out of itself, without struggle. And it knows how to do it. And it is doing it. Right here and right now. So what we want to come into then is the complete realization that when you and I, when each and every person awakens to that spiritual presence within us, when we nurture it, when we let it grow, when we dedicate ourselves to our prayer, to our meditation, to our education, to our affirmations, to our visualization, when we awaken within ourselves a burning desire for the direct experience of God now, here, in this place, that we too go through that period of the casting off of all things mortal, the letting go of the ego, the letting go of the struggle and the surrender. Now, William James gave a series of lectures in Edinburgh in late 1800s, it was 1897, 1898, that became published in a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience. Now, you may recognize William James as known as the father of American psychology. And William James, just a brief history, his family, his parents, were students of New Thought through a line that came down from P.P. Quimby. Now, Quimby, you may recognize, is ground zero for New Thought in America. Most scholars, if you try to trace back where did these ideas of New Thought come from in America, they usually go back to Quimby, ground zero with Quimby. And then different people who studied with Quimby went off in different directions. And some of those people were associated with William James's parents. So William James was raised in what we would consider to be an optimistic New Thought household. And when William James gave the lectures on the varieties of religious experience, he talked about two general worldviews when it came to religion. He said there was the negative-minded pessimists, which you can tell right away he didn't associate himself with, or he would have called them something else, realists. There's a negative-minded pessimist, and then there was the healthy-minded optimists. And in light of traditional religious views, you might consider what he was talking about, the negative-minded pessimists were the people who believed in the wickedness of humankind, that humans were essentially bad, that life was a struggle, and that there was a Savior that came and relieved everybody of the burden of their sins, and the adherents, they could be saved by acknowledging their Savior. He says the healthy-minded optimists, on the other hand, they didn't necessarily believe in the wickedness of the world. They thought life might be pretty good as it is. But at some point they came to awakening, and their awakening was, oh my goodness, that presence is within me. That presence and that activity is as me. And not only is life pretty good and the world pretty good, but because I am a part of this power that knows how to do everything, then I too can use that power. I too can demonstrate that power in order to have a better life, a better human life, as Joel Goldsmith would put it. When we first awaken, we want more human stuff, better houses, better cars, better jobs, those kind of things. So here William James kind of put this as the first step of the religious experience. I think he had 4 steps in his lectures, and I can't remember the other 3 right now. But the first one is this awakening, this spiritual awakening, the conversion experience, if you will. So on the one hand, you can imagine a conversion experience that says, I've got religion. I've awakened to religion. I have religion. And I realize that even though the world is wicked and I've been wicked, I realize that all of that's gone because now I've got religion. Now I am part of the chosen ones. And then you have the healthy-minded optimists who say they have their conversion experience, and they say, I am a part of something so much greater than I am, and I can learn how to work and cooperate with that for good. And that is the equivalent of the conversion experience from both sides. And here's what I find most interesting. William James says if you observe the adherents on either side, if you observe the adherents who have gone through the conversion experience, nothing significant changes in their lives. In other words, they continue doing everything exactly the same as they did before, but they feel better about it. They feel better about it because they've been converted. They've had their awakening. And we do that. As human beings, we do that. But what we're talking about here is we are talking about growing and nurturing and moving beyond that first stage of the human excitement, if you want to call it that, about this awakening. And we want to move to the point where we are willing to let go of everything that we have declared, all the material things in our lives that we have declared that have had power over us. And as Ernest Holmes says, our lives become a demonstration of the superiority of spiritual thought force over material conditions. So the question then is, what would life look like if you and I were observers? What would life look like if we truly recognized ourselves as immortal, eternal beings? If we truly recognized ourselves as being an expression of that immutable force, of the omniscience, of the omnipotence, of the omnipresence that God must be. Could we go through life in perfect ease? Could we go through life without a sense of struggle? Could we go through life without an egotistical need to make things happen so we could feel important about ourselves? And could we be elated in simply observing what God as us is doing? First thing to consider is this, and that is, how old are you? How old is your soul? Now, most of us, when we're asked how old we are, we will calculate the number of years from when the first body that we had in this lifetime was born. And we'll say, well, I'm 64 years old. Am I? What is 64 years old? Is it this body? Well, no. Not this body. Science tells us that our body is completely renewed every 2 years. Even the bones. Every cell in the body is gone. Every cell in your body that you have right now will be gone in 2 years. And be replaced. So what's 64 years old? Is it the soul? No. The soul is part of that which was never born and will never die. The soul is part of the eternal spirit of God. The soul is that very part where God has become individualized as me. Therefore, the soul, the true spiritual identity of who and what I am, was never born. So it's not 64 years old. Yet there was something of consciousness that was there when I was born. There was something of consciousness that was there when I was 2 years old. And even though the body that I had, or that I used, or that I experienced, however you want to put it, when I was 2 years old, is now gone and long gone, there was an observer, there was a witness. There was something that I recognized as me that was there. And even though that consciousness has outlived many bodies along the way, there is something that still recognizes it as me. So I have to recognize then that I, whatever I am, and I don't know entirely what that is, I'm discovering that every day, but what I am is not this body. It must be spirit. Recognizing then that spirit, the presence of God as me, is the only truth that there is. Right? Everything else is turning to dust. The only truth that there is, can I now commit myself to allowing God's life to express through me completely. So what is it that the day brings to us? What are the activities that we go forth in? Can we do them in perfect ease? Can we allow them to unfold in perfect ease? Can we let go of the delusion of and the addiction to the idea that we are somehow in control? Right? The human ego loves to think that it's in control, wants to be in control of all things at all times, wants to understand how everything's working out so it can make decisions and feel important about understanding and being in control. And yet we're riding this tiny rock, hurling in space around a nuclear furnace, that's moving within a galaxy, that's moving within a universe, that is very likely one of many universes. We have no idea how all that happens, and yet we think we're in control. So can we surrender to the activity of God within us? Can we invite it in the morning to lead us where we need to be, where it needs to be as us? Can we invite it to advise us? Can we invite it to inform us? Can we invite it to guide us and take us by the hand and bring us exactly where we need to be to do whatever it is that the love of God as us needs to do in that day? Can we trust the omniscience? Can we trust the omnipotence? When we come upon an apparent obstacle or a problem, instead of immediately sitting down with our clipboard and our pen and thinking of all of the human ways that we are going to organize our resources to tackle this problem, can we stop right there, and remember there are no problems in the mind of God? You know, a lot of times what we consider to be a problem is just simply because we're not getting our way. It's not going the way that we thought it should go. And what we have to learn is that maybe it's going in a better way. There's a quote from Rumi I saw last week that kind of said, stop struggling with it. You don't know whether the other way is better than your way or not. Maybe that's the way it's trying to go. Can we learn how to let it have its way? Can we learn how to listen to our intuition? Can we learn how to listen to that which is telling us what this means is we have to learn to be still? Because that still small voice is constantly with us. It is constantly guiding us. It is constantly trying to point us in the right direction. But it can't break through the noise. The noise of the radio, the noise of the TV, the noise in the room, but mostly the noise in our consciousness. The thoughts which are running at 100 miles an hour and won't stop. The folks in the East tell us we have to let the ripples on the surface of the pond calm down so we can see below and observe what is deeper. And part of our spiritual practice has to be learning to tame our own mind, learning to be in the stillness. You've seen a quote by Abraham Lincoln that said if he only had 4 hours to chop down a tree, he thinks he'd spend the first 3 sharpening his axe. You have to prepare. And if we're faced with what we think is a problem, instead of jumping in and trying to solve the problem with the human intellect, the human ego, and the human resources that we have available to us, perhaps the first thing we should do is sit down and sharpen our consciousness with our spiritual practice of recognizing that there are no problems in the mind of God, that whatever needs to happen here, the divine knows how to do, and the divine is doing it. We set into motion an immutable power that goes forward and does what needs to be done. Can we envision what it's like to live a life of perfect ease? Can we envision what it is like to live a life as a fully realized spiritual being? Can we envision what it is like to live a life where we do not separate and we do not say that that is spiritual and that is physical? And yes, maybe great teachers who lived a long, long time ago can live their lives like that, but I'm here and now and I can't. Can we take all of that human idea of limitation and break through and let it go? The love of God is here and it is now. It is not far, far away, a long, long time ago. It is here and it is now. The activity and the presence of God is visible all around us at all times, and it always functions in perfect ease. So I invite you then to consider this week what your life would look like if lived from the position of perfect ease, from the full and complete realization of your own spiritual nature, for the complete turning away from what appears to be the physical obstacles that our human consciousness knows of. Can we roll back that stone? Can we step forward into life renewed, but living it at a different level? I don't think any of us wants to go through this life with the epitaph that William James has painted. Had a spiritual awakening? Nothing significant changed. I think what enamors us about this time of the year is the realization that these stories apply to us. that we are that soul that is awakening to the truth of its own being, that we are casting off our own humanity, our own mortality, our own sense of identity, our own ego. And we are allowing the love of God to quicken itself in us and our spiritual nature. When we were studying Spiritual Economics by Eric Butterworth, there's a story that he relates in there that is kind of reminiscent of the stories of the Buddha, of the Christ. Francis of Assisi, you might remember, when Francis of Assisi had his spiritual awakening, he was born a rich man's son, but he went out into the streets of his town and he let go of all of the clothes that his father had given him, and he proceeded naked into his new life, taking nothing of his old life with him. And this is all symbolic of letting go of our mortal ideas, letting go of all of these ideas, willingness to sit under the tree until we die, willingness to have our physical body crucified because it is not who we are, to let go of the ideas of mortality, to let go of the ideas of materialism. But in this story that Eric Butterworth gives us is that there's a young girl who is born into a house of wealth. She's raised in a very privileged life, and she decides that she cannot pursue her spiritual growth living in those conditions, that she needs to break the ties of materialism. She needs to go out into the world and trust completely in God and allow God's grace to guide her and to take care of her. So she awakens in the middle of the night, and she changes out of her clothes in which people would have recognized her as being wealthy, and she puts on the clothes of a pauper so she can move freely about the streets. And as she is about to leave home, right, to let go of her mother and her father, to let go of all of the material support she had, to let go of everything and to depend fully on the presence of God within her, she reaches up to the mantle where they kept a jar with coins in it, and she takes out enough money to buy a loaf of bread for that day. And as she heads to the door, she hears a voice say to her, "What's the penny for? What's the penny for? You're either going to trust me or you're not. You're either going to trust your spiritual nature or you're not," is what the voice is implying to her. I invite you this year, if you haven't already done so, I invite you this year, make that commitment that this is the year that you trust. You trust in perfect ease. You trust the love. You trust the wisdom. You trust the presence of God. And you trust fully that just like the process takes the caterpillar and completely dissolves it into a blob of jelly before the butterfly can emerge, you trust completely the process that transforms you from someone who believes I'm only human to a spiritual being living life in perfect ease. Let's let the love of God come through more completely. Let's let there be a visible difference in our experiences as we live our lives as people who understand that we of our own self can do nothing, but the love and the wisdom and the power does it all, as us, to us, and through us. And so it is.